Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Robbie, what do we have?
Well, Democratic strategist Jennifer Holdsworth-Karp and Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard, joins us to discuss the mysterious saga of Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai and the censorship surrounding her story. And journalist and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast, Matt Taibbi, is here for a deeper dive on the media's handling of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial.
But first, people gathered for a vigil in Waukesha. Is that how you say it? Waukesha?
I think so.
I've always wondered. Okay, Waukesha, Wisconsin last night to honor the 5 victims that were killed and at least 48 others injured during a community Christmas parade after a man plowed through a crowd in an SUV on Sunday. The vigil was held at Cutler Park, just a block away from where the horrific attack took place. That left 6 children in critical condition. Other victims include members of the Dancing Grannies, who describe themselves as a group of grannies who meet once a week to practice routines for summer and winter parades. The man in question is Darrell Brooks Jr., a Milwaukee man with a criminal history dating back to 1999. Police say he was fleeing a domestic dispute when he mowed into the crowd, but they add that police were not chasing him at the time.
And apparently it's being alleged the police did fire at him at some point. They did shoot at him, but then stopped shooting because there were so many people. And
good call, probably,
yes,
yeah.
Very good call. He's been... So now there's a question of because he had a previous outstanding warrant in, I believe, Nevada?
Nevada, he jumped bail, yeah.
Right, and he jumped bail, and then his bail was set at his subsequent bail.
Well, worse, yeah, right.
Right, was set at like $1,000 or something.
Well, right, so he was arrested for allegedly driving over his girlfriend in a domestic violence dispute.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really a dispute, that's just an attack.
Right.
Right. And so he was initially given a $10,000 bond, which he did not post. He then applied for a speedy trial, which is part of constitutional right. And the prosecutor was not ready to offer a trial, and so they dropped the bail down to $1,000, which he was then able to post and get out. And then 2 days later, he mows through the crowd and kills 5 people. The prosecutor's office, this is not a reformist, this is not a criminal justice reformer type prosecutor, this is an old school prosecutor. Prosecutor's office has said they made a mistake, that not in hindsight. Like, obviously, in hindsight, they made a mistake. Nobody disagrees with that. There are 5 dead people and 40 suffering from injuries from this truck plowing through the crowd. What they're saying is that that this was against their guidelines, and they're trying to figure out how it was that they went from 10,000 to 1,000 just because of this speedy trial request. Well, people request speedy trials all the time and get shot down.
Well, and it's got to be that someone who posted bail and then fled a different state and didn't show up for trial, that person's bail should not be set the next time. Right. Should not be set like at all, and honestly. Frankly, if you get out, you don't show up for your trial, you should not get bail the next time, probably at all.
Right. The good indication of whether you're going to jump bail is whether you've jumped bail.
Right.
You're currently out on a bail that you've jumped. I think one thing this shows is the way that the states don't communicate with each other.
Right.
And so it's quite likely that Waukesha County didn't know about this Nevada case. Now you can,
but that's a huge failing, right? Because that should be easy enough information to be obtained by people who are looking at someone.
And I think more importantly, if you ever see somebody getting released more quickly than you expected, or getting charges dropped faster than you might have expected, and you go ahead and guess that it was a domestic violence charge, you're almost always going to be right. Like, we continue to be very tough on crime in this country, despite all of the kind of rhetoric around police reform and criminal justice reform. But when it comes to domestic violence, we are not tough on that crime. That's even if you drive somebody over, even if you drive your girlfriend over with your truck, it's still like, this is a personal dispute between. And so the misogyny that is shot through the court system and the justice system leads to so many domestic abusers getting just massively, disparately lower bail and sentences and charges than for any other crime of equal violence. And so when I saw this and saw that he had just recently been released from domestic violence charges, like, yeah, that checks
well,
out.
And I was frankly surprised to hear anyone in the office say that, oh, yeah, this was a mistake. It's weird, weird to hear. It must be a big mistake if they actually admitted it was a mistake without dissembling for...
Right, maybe they can't defend that the position that they took, and I don't think it actually is, like, since they're not a bail reform, criminal justice reform type prosecutor, they weren't trying to defend that type of thing.
Right.
So yeah, they're like, oh, but this is like Willie Horton times 1,000.
Yeah. We've discussed the Rittenhouse trial at length on this show and disputed the narrative that the case was at its core about race. The mainstream media was called out on Twitter for continually demonizing white men at large amid Rittenhouse's sentencing, but used the term suspect to describe Brooks, who is a black man who was recently released on bail. Wisconsin officials will charge Brooks with 5 counts of intentional homicide, but said the incident was not an act of terrorism. There's no evidence that it was. Andy Ngo took to Twitter to discuss Brooks' past and found that in a now deactivated Facebook account, Brooks had posted a quote that said, run them over, keep traffic flowing, and don't slow down for any of these idiots, back in 2016. So, we're doing this comb through his previous social media history thing. I think Andy described him as, so he's a supporter or member or something of Black Lives Matter, which is actually an important distinction, right? Because you can be Black Lives Matter, the sentiment is actually that's... There
are like hundreds of...
Everyone is, I'm a supporter of Black Lives Matter in the broadest possible sense. I'm not a member of the organization. I wouldn't attend their rallies. I don't agree with a lot of but I agree that, that black people have been mistreated by this. So
I'm not even sure what membership means. Like, there's hundreds of Black Lives Matter groups.
Yeah, there's not a formal initiation process. So my point being, it's not wrong to say that he expressed some pro-Black Lives Matter sentiment, and there was,
as 80% of the country.
Right. So there was. I was seeing like a lot of jumping on Andy, and I have defended Andy sometimes when I think he's been falsely accused of being like in cahoots with right-wing organizations. I have also criticized and disagreed with how he's characterized some of his own reporting, some of the incidents. So I think similarly, I would not have framed some of these things how he's framing them, and it's very early to make. Like, incredibly early to make sweeping generalizations about who this man is and what he believes and whether what he believes has anything to do with this crime. But on the other hand, this kind of sort of speculation and searching for what the suspect's beliefs might be occurs every single time, and the left or the liberals, the mainstream media does it just as eagerly for Rittenhouse and for anyone else to find evidence of ties to white militias or white nationalist groups or whatever. So it's very funny to be like so mad at Andy for doing that when the people who always do that are the ones mad about it right now. And in fact, they're trying to tie Andy to those groups, to militias and white nationalist organizations.
Right. If you don't like that type of dot connecting, then don't do it yourself immediately in reverse instances. What I would say is that if this were an act of, let's call it terrorism or whatever. Like, in other words, if the reason he got behind the wheel and plowed through the crowd was to kill the people in the crowd and to then sow terror throughout the community, then whatever his purpose, his motivation, his politics behind doing that act were, that matters a lot. If this guy is a bad dude who's had spent 20 years in and out of prison and is 2 days away from getting released on a domestic violence charge, has another domestic violence incident, and is fleeing from that, and there is a parade in his way, and he's so psychopathic that he doesn't care that these people are between him and escaping whatever he's trying to escape. He just barrels through it. Like, that's not a political act. Right. That's just evil. Then it doesn't matter whether the person is a Trump supporter or an Al Gore supporter or a climate change denier or supports Black Lives Matter, because the incident had nothing to do with politics. It's just his like psychopathic impulse to just behave in a sociopathic, psychopathic kind of way.
Well, and these things are always, I agree with you, but it is often, and it might not be more complicated in this situation, but oftentimes it actually is a little bit more complicated than that, because people who attach themselves to, or crazy people can also attach themselves to fringe causes or extreme causes.
Right.
And then there's this messy intertangle between, well, this person happens to believe nutty things, maybe, but they're not actually, they're just a crazy person.
And that's relevant if the act was an expression of that attachment to that cause. But if, let's say he shot up a 7-Eleven and robbed it, and was also a Black Lives Matter supporter, like that, it's not as if that was a political act. Like people do bad things in their personal lives.
No, you're right.
Disconnected from politics.
People are desperate for answers and for so people
we don't want to
think
that some sociopath just
we don't want to think it's random and there's no explanation for it. We want to understand it. We want it to be as clear and obvious as it is in crime television and shows and books, where we put all the pieces together and we understand. But sometimes, like, just bad, screwed up people do bad, screwed up things, and it's not satisfying for the news media or for the consumers of news media.
The Pulse nightclub shooting is a slightly different example.
The Intercept's reporting on that was terrific.
And it was understood as an anti-LGBT hate crime for a very long time. And
it was not that.
It turned out that that was the random bar. That he decided to shoot up, and it just happened to be a gay bar.
Which is a good lesson for being patient, being thorough, and waiting before you draw conclusions, because what seemed like the obvious takeaway in that turned out to be totally wrong.
I mean, and you can't blame anybody for
jumping to that conclusion. Coming up next, we'll tell you what's on our radar. Stick around for that.